So we're at Fort Knox on hunting area 6, where we've had beavers have backed up this little stream, and it over time has killed a large number of trees. And we've had the suspicion that we had some good bat habitat here, so we brought in some of our artificial BrandenBark structures and put them up, and within 1 day of installing them, the next morning we had bats in our BrandenBark roost, and I can hear a bat squeaking in this one right here. See right at the opening at the bottom of the bark, and the pole is stained? That's actually urine and guano from bat use that has kind of leaked down the tree, and that's a really good indication that the roosts have been used a lot by a lot of bats over the 3 or 4 years that these have been up. BrandenBark is an artificial bark that is used to mimic the habitat used by endangered bats that roost under the bark of dead trees. As trees die and the bark pops loose, it provides this roosting habitat for a lot of bats, including some of our endangered bats like the Indiana bat and now the newly listed northern bat.
Some of the benefits of BrandenBark is that they can house large quantities of bats within a single structure.
And one summer, we counted over 400 bats coming out of a BrandenBark roost. I don't remember the exact number, but it's around 430. And then we had a couple of roosts that were over 400 bats, which is just astronomical for any roost, much less natural or artificial.
Another benefit is that these structures will outlast standing snags. Those trees over time will shed the bark that they have and eventually fall over. BrandenBark structures will almost always outlast those standing snags.
Ideally, it's a tool that we use to bridge the gap between the loss of habitat and between the successional stages of a natural forest before natural roosts come available. So in areas that we're having a high amount of degradation of natural roost trees, the BrandenBark structures work really well. It also helps maintain a colony in one place, and it gives you a place to go to and monitor your colony. So we can go to these structures, check the structures for guano, make sure there are bats still there. We can do exit counts. We can compare those exit counts over the course of several years and determine that we still have a viable population of bats. And that's important for long-term projects that might have an impact on endangered species.
BrandenBark structures can be installed practically anywhere. Wetlands, uplands, along field edges, along right-of-ways, forest openings, anywhere that there is adequate solar exposure to warm up the roost, and there is an ease of access for the contractors.
So the bark was designed at Fort Knox over a couple of years, where we were working with a colony of Indiana bats that were active really close to an active tank range. So what we wanted to do was identify another area that was suitable for the bats, and at that site we started to develop a method to maintain the habitat.
And we determined that we needed an artificial roost structure that was specifically designed for bark roosting bats. We attached EcoShake shingles, natural bark, and fiberglass artificial bark to snags. We found that they were getting use, but the numbers just weren't there that we find in a natural roost tree.
So we started working with a company that creates artificial trees for zoos and malls and movie sets.
So with our bark, we get a lot of unique requests from different types of theming applications and hunting applications and for weird projects and museums and other displays. But really, BrandenBark was the first opportunity that we got to work in the environmental aspect of our bark's uses. It was just a really unique development project that we had never even thought was possible.
It took us about 2 years to develop a bark that would give the visual cues that bats may be looking for, as well as the thermal dynamics that would provide the natural roosting temperatures that bats need to raise their young.
One of the things that we had to figure out was how the bats were going to be able to attach themselves to it, because unlike real bark, the backsides of our material is a rather slick process. So there were several trial and errors of what size meshing to use so that the bats could still climb up our product but not get trapped in between the layer of meshing and the bark. Our flex bark process starts with realism, and we actually take latex molds off of real trees. Then once things are ready for production, we are able to spray our 2-component polyurea, and once it's cured up, it is completely inert and does not give off any gases or other chemicals. After that process is finished, we're able to demold it. From there, we add a high-quality exterior paint as a solid base coat, and then we wash over it with a top coat that gives it the final appearance.
These are our 2 different types of BrandenBark. They serve the same purpose, they just have a slightly different design. This one here is our poplar, so it kind of mimics the bark structure of a tulip poplar, and we will use this when we're installing near deciduous trees. This one on my right is a pine, and so if you look at it, you can kind of see some of the knobs going through it, but it mimics a pine tree, and when we can, we kind of like to match them up with the surrounding habitat that they're installed at. This particular project for TVA, they were interested in improving bat habitat.
We really wanted to improve habitat specifically for threatened and endangered bats, and in this area that's mainly Indiana bats, northern long-eared bats, and gray bats. And we have plenty of caves in the Tennessee Valley, which is wonderful. But for summer roosting habitat, we needed something that would apply specifically to Indiana bats, and BrandenBark seemed to be the best fit for that.
They gave us a list of properties that they own that they thought would be good candidates to install these structures to improve habitat.
We selected our sites because of their proximity to the Tennessee Valley reservoirs. We believe that the Tennessee River is used as a navigational aid for the bats as they're emerging from their caves and trying to find their summer roosting sites.
We're on our way out to Marbot Bend. Had about an hour-and-a-half delay waiting on the poles to arrive, but we're on our way now. Taking it extra slow because we've got 30-foot poles on a 19-foot trailer.
Here at the Marmot Bend site, we're installing 6 BrandenBark structures. We chose this site because of the really nice wetland that was created by a couple beaver, as well as the public access, so we can use the BrandenBark structures as an educational tool for the public as well.
In 2014, we constructed a 1.1 mile walking trail here at the site. The trail includes an 1,100-foot boardwalk through the beaver pond. The area was developed as a partnership between TVA, Limestone County Commission, and the farmer who cuts hay on the property. All 3 groups worked together to develop the parking lot, walking trail, boardwalk for public use.
I've put some spray paint on these cattails to show the contractors where we need to dig the holes. Currently they're digging one of them, so we've got a couple more to go. Put our sheet of bark on the pole, slide it down a little bit. Okay. So we're just kind of measuring, making sure we can get that top piece nice and flush around the top of the pole. Yep. All right. Go ahead and put a screw in there. So ideally we'd like to get a space of about 3 to 5 inches. This bark and pole are making it a little difficult. We're gonna put screws in about every 12 inches. This piece of bark gave us a little bit of trouble. Each pole is different, each sheet of bark is a little different, and so you end up with a product that is going to look slightly different every time. So we just got the first pole up. Now we're filling it in so that the pole can stand on its own.
I've been doing this for 20 to 25 years, and this has been a unique experience. Never have seen nothing like this before, and I think it's good for the environment and nature, and I'd like to really do it again.
Part of TVA's stewardship of our property is managing natural resources, and that it does include the bat population. We're putting these habitats here, hoping that they will be used by area bats, in particular a couple of federally protected species, the northern long-eared and Indiana bats.
All right, we're on our last pole of the day. It's been an eventful day. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears have kind of gone into this, a little bit of swimming. And we're up against the clock now. There's some storms rolling in, so we need to get this one in the ground and secured.
Oh, shit, I put him in the
Gas cap?
Yeah, I was afraid of him getting locked in here. Oops.
We're here at the Cave Mountain site. We have 4 poles to install here. It's a nice site because of the large water tupelo swamp joining the right-of-way. So that provides additional habitat for the bats and a large food source. The footprint of BrandenBark structures is very minimal. There'll be a little bit of disturbance due to the equipment that is used to install the BrandenBark structures, but in the end, all you have is a small disturbed area around the artificial root structure, and over time, that will then regrow and the footprint will be minimal to none.
So right now they're going ahead and trying to spin this pole around before we get too much dirt around it. On the last hole, our contractor Chris was so efficient, he got the dirt in before we knew what was going on, and we ended up snapping one of our poles trying to get it spun around. We need to orient the opening of the pole to the outside of the tree line to make it easier for the bats to have access to get in.
Putting our last pole in at the Cave Mountain site, this was really about the only suitable place that got lots of solar exposure and was in the open. So we selected these sites along the right-of-ways to help keep the mothers and the pups warm throughout the year.
The right-of-ways are really nice because it provides this edge habitat, and you want to cluster them. When I say clustering, 3 to 5, at this site behind me we have 10 over about 4 acres. And that clustering effect is important because it provides the bats with different areas to roost for different conditions. As the summer heats up, they may want to move into a roost that gets a lot more shade. Early in the season, they may want to be in a roost that gets a lot more solar exposure.
TVA is the largest power company in the Southeast and in the U.S. We provide power to over 9 million people in the Southeast, covering 7 states. We also manage the 5th largest river system in the United States, which is the Tennessee River System. And TVA also manages over 200,000 plus acres of land, much of which we set aside for resource conservation, and manage it to improve and enhance habitat throughout the valley for several different species, including some of those listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. We selected this area for 2 reasons. One, because of the nearby cave, which has historical records of roosting Indiana bats, and the forested corridors in the area provide ideal foraging habitat.
All right, so our contractor's got our poles stacked up. We're going to get started installing the BrandenBark while he's digging the holes. Greg and I are going to get our gloves on because we are stacked in a big thicket of poison ivy, and today is not the day that I want to test fate. Not allergic, but I might be.
We're very excited about this project because it's the largest habitat improvement project for which BrandenBark has been used outside of the Fort Knox area.
We've gotten a lot of questions about the placement of the BrandenBark on the poles, and had several people ask if we'd ever tried putting the BrandenBark farther down the poles. Typically, we want to have those at the very top. We try to get those approximately 25 feet. Reason being that the higher up the bats are, the lower the risk of predation. So we don't want to have them lower to the ground where the roost is going to be accessible to any predators like snakes or raccoons that might crawl up there and get a hold of any of the bats.
Now that our artificial roost structures have been installed, we'll come back later in the summer to monitor the poles for any bat activity. We're headed down to Cundiff at Fort Knox to net BrandenBark structures and try to catch bats. We've got some folks from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service coming out, and this is part of an ongoing project to monitor the Indiana bat colony.
What I'm doing right now is collecting guano and seeing if there are any bats in the tree. And I don't even have to smack this one because they're already making noise. But I just check the tree tag number and then collect any guano and make any notes of what I see.
Right now we're lining up the nets, and then Rob is putting stakes in. So the poles will go over these stakes, and there's a pulley rope similar to a flagpole that we'll use to raise and lower the nets.
This looks so simple. This is 20 years in development of trying to figure out how to catch bats. Because if you put one net up, those guys come out and you never catch anything. Because there's many nights that I screamed and cussed and blah, blah, blah. The way that the nets are parallel allows a bat to come out of the roost and they fly down this very narrow path. Bats have a lot of trouble getting altitude. So unlike a bird that can take off straight from the ground, do about a 45-degree takeoff, bats can't do that. So when they come out of the roost, they'll drop 1 to 2 feet, and then they'll start to kind of flutter. But to get altitude, they have to zigzag, almost like the back switches of a trail going up a hillside. So giving them a narrow path, they can't get any altitude. They'll fly down it, and they'll want to turn, and eventually they'll turn it into the net.
Structures have proven to be very successful at focusing maternity colonies in our state and others so that we can encourage research and monitor populations.
Can you guys bring down this one? Mostly we're seeing adult white-heading females and some juvenile Indiana bats. Okay, back up.
That is milk in the teat. She's molted so you can actually see it because the fur's all falling off.
This bump of skin right here is one of the main characteristics of an Indiana bat.
We have significant concerns about the loss of the variety of species of bats as well as the numbers, particularly the fact that we don't really have a solution to white nose syndrome or know what to do about it. We're hoping that there are bats in places that can hold out through the syndrome and in places that they either are not hibernating or that they have a genetic resistance and that they'll come back. But in the meantime, making sure that there's still habitat is what we've been focused on.